Hello, and welcome back to another episode of I Desperately Need a Haircut. Ask your grandma to name one video game character, and after she's done complaining about how much time you waste playing video games, I would bet you most times she'd say Mario. I mean, just look at this guy. You can tell right off the bat, you can put him anywhere and it'll be a pretty good time. He can run, jump, drive, fight, party, just about as good as anybody else. I think he's kind of unique in this, in that you can have almost any genre of video game, make it Mario themed, and it still works pretty well. If you think through all of the other A-list video game characters, other than maybe Sonic, I don't think any of them have quite the range that Mario has. Like, Master Chief is iconic and great where he is, but I don't think that Halo Party would be as fun as Mario Party. When you really think about it, Mario only works as the mascot of pretty much everything Nintendo because he's basically just a blank slate. He has the kind of face that can simultaneously be everywhere at once, but also doesn't really have much personality and depth to his character beyond wahoo! He truly is the Chris Pratt of video game characters. Like, if you were to just look at this picture, take a minute, there's Waldo. But it would take me a much longer time to prove to you that Mario isn't in this menagerie of white people here. It's not that that's a bad thing. Mario isn't meant to have the complexity of a BioShock villain. He's meant to run, jump, drive, fight, and party, and he doesn't need to do much else. Mario games are simple, approachable, fun, and I am a sucker for a good Mario game. Mario Galaxy specifically. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I was watching the Nintendo Direct this June. I was actually watching it at work while I was supposed to be doing something else. If you're my boss, you didn't hear that. And the big reveal at the end of it was that there is a big new 2D Mario game coming out. Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It's coming this October. I saw so many people get really excited about it online, but for some reason, I can't bring myself to get excited about it. I know that's a problem for just me personally, and it's not actually causing any issues in my life, but you're still watching this video, so you're gonna hear me talk about it for a little longer, I guess. I think to get to the root of this problem, we have to go back in time. The year is 1981. I am negative 19 years old. Nintendo releases Donkey Kong into the arcades, starring Donkey Kong and an unnamed player character. Now, Miyamoto wanted the character to be Popeye, but couldn't get the license to use Popeye characters, so he made him a blank guy who runs, jumps, and smashes. Mario here later got a starring role in his own arcade game before, of course, starring in Super Mario Bros. For NES. I always thought that Super Mario Bros. Was made for the launch of the NES, but the Japanese version of the NES, the Famicom, was already out for 2 years before Super Mario Bros. Came out on it. It was a launch game in North America and was bundled with the console for most of its life, and I think that's a great decision. This is a perfect game to show off what the NES is and what it can be. It's simple, but not to a fault. It's simple enough to be approachable, but there's a good amount of nuance and skill to be found in it when you really get into the game, especially if you're trying to go for high scores or a speed run of it. If you've ever watched a Mario Brothers speed runner, you'll know what I'm talking about with these human computers that you have to be in order to try and get a record time on Mario Brothers. Now, Super Mario got 3 to 4 releases on the NES, depending on how you count. Then got 2 main releases on Game Boy as Super Mario Land 1 and 2. Mario Land isn't a massive game by any means, but again, it does a really good job of introducing you to Game Boy. That's all it needed to do. And then Mario Land 2 introduced Wario, so that's certainly something. We wouldn't have that YouTube video of Wario crashing his car on Wario's Gold Mine if Mario Land 2 hadn't come out. So Mario Land 2 is justified by that alone. The Super Nintendo launched with Super Mario World, and this is my favorite 2D Mario game. I love the art style, and I wish that Nintendo used this style a little bit more when producing modern Mario nostalgia. I feel like they lean a little bit too hard on the kind of new Super Mario Bros. Or 8-bit Mario style without ever really going back to this one in the middle. I mean, they do, but not as much as I'd want them to. I love the kind of cartoony look while still being really colorful and fun. The power-ups in this game are cool, and of course it introduced Yoshi, which makes a lot of sense to include in a Mario game because I'm sure, like all of you, when I hear Italian Plumber, of course I think Dinosaur Jockey. So there was a 14-year gap between 2D Mario games, between Mario Land 2 and New Super Mario Bros. And this is where I think started us all down the path for me not caring that much about Super Mario Wonder. All of the new Super Mario Bros. Games feel high quality and well thought out and absolutely feel like Mario games because they follow that same formula that was defined in 1985 on the NES, and that's it. That's the problem. I think if they change anything more than a couple new power-ups, enemies, a couple set pieces, 2D Mario just wouldn't feel like Mario. Like, if suddenly the next 2D Mario game gave him this vast, complex moveset, or like a gun, it would be fun. That would be a fun video game, but it wouldn't be a Mario game necessarily. Something would just feel off. In any video game series, you can't really change the core of it too much. And I think because the core of Mario was developed so long ago for such limited hardware, it feels like 2D Mario will never be able to be exciting like something less restrictive. They defined in 1985 that Mario is run, jump, make it to the end of the level, and then they reinforced that for Mario 1, 2, 3, Mario Land 1 and 2, Mario World, and now that formula is basically set in stone. And we can't really grow from that. But when I was growing up, 2D Mario was always fun, but not the main thing for Mario, as far as I was concerned. When I was a kid, this was Mario. And this is phenomenal. When Mario switched over to 3D with Super Mario 64, they had to change a lot about its structure to make it work in 3D, as well as on the limitations of the N64. Now that they're in this completely new dimension, they had some freedom to actually go outside of that rigidly defined formula and change stuff about it because people expected something new and different. And at its core, just like the 2D games, Mario 64 is run and jump, and that's about it. Run, jump, collect stars. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but not by much. But being in 3D allowed the game to do something that you just couldn't do in 2D. It allowed you more exploration and discovery in your platforming rather than just, everything being perfectly laid out on that 2D grid and you just making your way over to the right side of the screen. You actually had to look around and try and find where to go to get to your goal. When it came time to develop the next Mario game for the next big Nintendo console, they stuck with this general format, but this time they didn't stick only within that rigid formula. They gave Mario Flood, a hose with a personality. Flood added a ton of new opportunities for interesting platforming and ways to interact with the environment while still feeling like Mario. Galaxy did something similar with the spin move, and now you have ways to explore planets and all sorts of different objects, and Odyssey kept this going with Cappy. I really like this way that they've been keeping 3D Mario games fresh and exciting by adding some sort of unique mechanic that Mario has on him all the time rather than just a power-up that he gets then loses. It helps give each game its own personality, and I feel like that's something that's kind of been missing from 2D Mario games. Other than the graphical styles, which have been pretty samey for a little while, ever since New Super Mario Bros., all of them kind of run together in my head. Yeah, they all have new power-ups and new levels, but because 2D Mario was so strict in that formula of you run, you jump, you make it to the end of the screen, you have some power-ups along the way. I feel like if they gave Mario a permanent power-up like Flood or like Cappy in a 2D Mario game, it would feel off. Just a little bit too awkward, and I feel like that's what's holding 2D Mario back in modern day. I understand a lot of people love the modern 2D Mario games and are excited for one, and Nintendo have surprised me in the past with their ability to take a formula that works so well, and I thought, where could they go from here? And then they innovate and make it fantastic for the next game, but I still am not all that excited about Mario Wonder. But of course, Mario isn't the only video game series that's been going for a super long time and has had that challenge of keeping itself fresh and interesting. Metroid is my favorite game series, but as I've mentioned previously on this channel, I don't really think it started getting going until Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo. So Metroid, if you don't know, is a game all about starting with a very basic moveset and abilities and collecting upgrades along your way to add to that moveset and abilities. So there are a couple upgrades that are in most Metroid games, but there are some unique ones too that make each game feel different. But much like Mario, the big interesting change in Metroid came when it switched to 3D. Metroid famously skipped the Nintendo 64 with its creators and directors famously saying that they just couldn't imagine a way to control Samus with that weird-ass N64 controller, so they waited until the GameCube to fully take that dive into 3D, and it was worth the wait, absolutely. At E3, a trailer for Metroid Prime was shown off, and audiences were initially mixed on their reaction to it. Yeah, I understand that. I was only 1 year old at the time, so I was busy thinking about not the current state of Metroid, but I could understand how audiences could see it as kind of jarring, you know, when Nintendo took this previously 2D side-scrolling action platformer series and they turned it into a first-person shooter. At the time, that probably felt like if they took something like Breaking Bad, but they just remade it as like a multi-camera sitcom from the 90s. Just imagine Jesse Pinkman, but his character is basically just Joey Tribbiani. But somehow, Nintendo and Retro Studios pulled it off. Metroid Prime brought all the spirit, the atmosphere, and the feel from Super Metroid and put it in first-person 3D. You're still exploring a big world to collect upgrades, to unlock more areas to explore, just this time from a different perspective. And there are some upgrades that work specifically because this is a fully 3D game. Even though the reception at that E3 was mixed at the time, Metroid Prime eventually launched to critical acclaim. I own 3 different copies of this game on 3 different consoles because it is fantastic. I've previously talked on this channel about how Sonic's transition from 2D to 3D maybe wasn't as smooth as Mario's, but Sonic Adventure is still a good game, even if it lacks a bit of polish, especially the PC port that runs like dog. It innovates well on the Sonic formula by making it so that you don't have to be super precise with a lot of your platforming, and there's opportunities to go fast, and to borrow a quote from a renowned philosopher of our time, gotta go fast. What, in my opinion, is not a great innovation on the Sonic formula is Sonic Unleashed. Other than the near constant loading screens at the beginning of the game, seriously, it felt like I was watching more loading screens than actually playing at this point. The parts with daytime Sonic are pretty fun. It feels like 3D Sonic gameplay right in between Sonic Adventure and Sonic Generations for me, 2 games which are pretty good and my favorite 3D Sonic. Which makes a lot of sense because Sonic Unleashed falls right in between these 2 chronologically. But then the night falls and the Werehog comes out. Now the Werehog stages are just beat-em-up stages that are a complete slog to get through. Sonic moves so slow in these stages, which is really annoying because the whole point of Sonic games is speed. Again, I quote, gotta go fast. Honestly, do you know what these stages feel like? God of War. They feel like God of War for PlayStation 2. You have a character that can throw together a bunch of combos against enemies, unlock more combos over time. You have these red orbs flying around towards your character. These are basically the same game. When I buy a Sonic game, it's because I want fast-paced platforming, not because I want to play an E10 plus God of War. Sonic Forces also does a bad job of adding to and innovating on Sonic's formula. At the start of Sonic Forces, you play a level as Sonic. Then, you create your own custom character. When I bought this Sonic game, it's because I wanted to play Sonic Forces, not nameless generic customizable character Forces. You don't have to play too many levels as the custom character, but there are just enough things right about Sonic Forces that I really wish that they didn't spend a bunch of time developing a character builder mechanic at all, and they just spent more of their development efforts on the regular Sonic stuff. If they did, it might have gotten better than a 57 on Metacritic. But when talking about games that started a long time ago and have continued to grow and innovate in a really impressive way without losing sight of its origins, we can't not talk about The Legend of Zelda. This series has changed the design of its main character an almost alarming number of times, but somehow we're still good, and we still all agree that this is the same series. The basic gameplay of the first Zelda game on NES is that you go and you explore this big overworld until eventually you find a dungeon, and then you battle your way through that to progress the game. I find the original Zelda really hard to do without a map or guide, but I see the value that this would have offered a gamer in the 80s. It's expansive and deep for its time, if maybe sometimes a little bit too obtuse. Then, when they moved on to the SNES, the world of Zelda got so much richer with more NPCs and places to explore, and it had this great art style that feels new and fresh but still respectful to the first game, much in the way that I love the art style of Mario World as it compares to the NES Mario games. The same thing happened when Zelda went 3D with Ocarina of Time, and I haven't played Majora's Mask yet. I have it. It's over there. Actually, give me a sec. I have it. But the last 2 games I've beaten have been Zelda games, and I'm just taking a little bit of a Zelda break before fully diving into this one. I feel like that's going to make me appreciate it a little bit more. But I know that Majora's Mask borrows a lot of mechanics and assets from Ocarina of Time, while also introducing some completely new stuff and feeling very different, but still being a lot of people's favorite Zelda game. Wind Waker on GameCube changed up the art style a lot. Then Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword had their own unique looks. Then we come to the most recent Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In my opinion, both of these are top-tier masterpiece games. I have heard some criticisms of these two that the dungeons can maybe be a little bit disappointing compared to Zelda games of years past, and I see where those criticisms are coming from, but that's not really a problem for me when playing it. After playing through each of the Divine Beasts, do I wish that there were a couple more with some more unique puzzles and big mechanical pieces moving through them to solve? Yeah, sure. But I do disagree with the idea that people seem to have that the point of Zelda is to explore the overworld, to find a dungeon, then the dungeon is the thing that actually progresses the game. I think that's a way to accomplish a good Zelda game, but it's not the only way. The original Zelda was meant to be a non-linear adventure where players had to explore and think about what to do next, as opposed to something like Mario, where it's pretty painfully obvious what to do next, and you got 2 directions to go. You came from that one, you better go that way. Instead, with Zelda, producer Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to channel the feeling that he got exploring nature around his home in Kyoto when he was a child, and discover new things around him. This is the core of what Zelda is about. It's about exploring a world in a non-linear fashion to discover interesting new things about the world and the people in it and the story behind everything that's there. Not just use this overworld as a means to find a dungeon and then that's your actual game. That formula of overworld, dungeon, progress, repeat is how a lot of games accomplish that mission, and some of them did it very, very well. But Breath of the Wild made me want to explore. The world of this game is so dense with things to find and do. It made me want to search every corner of the map to see if I could find a shrine or a Korok puzzle or even just an interesting looking group of rocks. Plus, you can complete the main story in any order you want. In Breath of the Wild, you're encouraged to find your own ways to get everywhere. Non-linear exploration. Reading about the history of Zelda 1, Breath of the Wild feels like a full realization of what Miyamoto wanted to do now that console specs allow them to develop something this massive. Sure, Link looks different, Hyrule may look different, the gameplay may be completely different, but these still feel like part of the same lineage. It still feels like the same love and respect was poured into all of these. In a world of a lot of media franchises, many of which feel like they've just gone on a little bit too long at this point, some of these game series do such a fantastic job at showing what you can do when you take time to think, innovate. It can make it so that a series can continue for almost 40 years at this point without any need to restart or reboot and still be fantastic. Anyways, what game series do you think does like a good job at staying true to its roots and form while still being innovative? I didn't even talk about God of War in this video, but I think that it did fantastically well when it moved from, you know, the first 3 God of Wars in Greece and then just decided, oh, let's move Kratos over to Norway. And it still worked, and it still felt like part of the same lineage, which is, I still don't quite know how they did that, but it's good. They're good games. But like, if you have any other ideas, specifically, what are some franchises other than Nintendo games? Like, I love Nintendo games, but there's more to gaming. Like, I've been playing a bunch on my PlayStation 5 now that I've beaten Tears of the Kingdom, and it's fun in an all different way, and I just love the variety that video games have. Anyways, we've reached the point where I've just started rambling into my camera, and I don't know how to end a video.